Undercover CEO buys a pickup truck at his own dealership, freezes when a customer speaks behind him. The morning sky hung low with January haze. As a battered, dust-caked Ford Ranger rolled into the lot of Canyon Ridge Auto, the biggest used car dealership in northern Arizona. It didn't look like much. Paint-chipped, bumper-dingle. But the man behind the wheel didn't care. That was the point. Miles Waverly, CEO, and founder of the Canyon Ridge chain, wore a flannel shirt too big for him, a trucker hat tugged low, and a wiry gray beard he'd let grow out for months. Even the security cameras wouldn't recognize him. He parked in the back, stepped out slowly, and ran a hand over the truck's rusted hood. It smelled like old oil and desert wind. Exactly what he wanted. Disguise wasn't just appearance. It was atmosphere. It was walking like you'd been on the road for days. As he approached the main sales building, familiar sights greeted him. Bold red banners screaming, "No credit, no problem." Rows of polished pickups lined like soldiers. The glass office where he'd once sat behind a desk, commanding a staff of 50. But now, it felt distant. Cold. Something was off. A salesman brushed past him without a glance. Two others huddled near a Silverado, laughing too loud. The front desk girl, maybe 22, was scrolling on her phone. No greetings. No eye contact. Miles kept walking, heart drumming a little faster. This was his kingdom, but it didn't feel like home. Then, just as he reached the coffee stand, he heard a voice behind him. A voice that made him stop. Cold. Miles stood still, his hand frozen mid-reach toward the cheap styrofoam cups by the coffee stand. The voice behind him belonged to a man. Gruff, very familiar in the way worn boots feel under old feet. "Yeah, nah, I used to work for the guy who owns this place," the man said, his tone edged with bitterness. Miles Waverly. Thought he gave a damn back then. Guess I was wrong. Miles didn't dare turn around. Instead, he shifted slightly, angling his ear. Just enough to catch every word. Another voice responded. Younger, female, empathetic. "You worked for Miles? Like, the actual owner? Built the damn service department from scratch?" The man said. A chuckle escaping, hollow and humorless. "Ran diagnostics faster than anyone. I trained half these kids who can't even tell a carburetor from a cup holder now." There was a pause. "So, what happened?" A sigh. "One day, new manager comes in. All numbers and quotas. Said the boss was too busy expanding the brand to get involved. I was let go a month later. No warning. After 18 years. Miles felt his stomach drop. The man kept going, voice tightening. Laid me off like I was nothing. Said I was too slow, too expensive. But the truth? I stood up for one of the techs who got shorted on his hours. They didn't like that. Damn, the woman whispered. Miles turned his head, just enough to catch a glimpse from the corner of his eye. The mannerly 50s, sun-scarred skin, grease under his nails, stood beside a dented Toyota Tacoma, arms crossed. His name didn't come right away, but something in his posture triggered a memory. Eddie Rivas. Eddie had worked for him since the very beginning, back when Canyon Ridge was just an idea, a borrowed loan, and 3 trucks on gravel. He wasn't just an employee, he was a foundation. And now, Eddie stood here, not as a master technician, not as a respected veteran, but as a customer. Or worse, someone who couldn't even afford to be one. Man gave speeches about loyalty, Eddie said, eyes fixed on the dealership building. Told us we were family, but families don't throw you out like garbage. The girl sales associate, or maybe admin, didn't respond. The silence between them settled, like dust in the desert. Miles stepped back, slowly, quietly, the weight of guilt beginning to press against his ribs. He felt like a ghost, walking through his own life. It had been years since he'd set foot in this branch. He'd been too focused on acquisitions, data sheets, conference calls. Managers handled the rest. That was the system. That was scale. But hearing Eddie's voice, raw and real, was a crack in the facade. One he hadn't expected. He backed away from the coffee stand and turned toward the lot again, his mind racing. He needed answers. And more than that, he needed to remember who Eddie Rivas really was. Because now, Miles couldn't shake the sinking feeling that somewhere along the way, he hadn't just lost touch. He lost his people. The sun was beginning to cut through the clouds, casting long shadows between the rows of used trucks. Miles walked slowly, his boots crunching against gravel, heart hammering in a rhythm he hadn't felt since his first day in business. Eddie Rivas. It all came back in pieces, like faded photos pulled from a box in the attic. Eddie had been the first mechanic Miles ever hired. Back when Canyon Ridge was just a rundown garage off Route 66. Eddie had walked in with a socket wrench in his hand and grease on his cheek, asking, "You looking for someone who won't quit on you?" He hadn't. Not once. For almost 2 decades, Eddie worked through brutal summers and engine fires. 70-hour weeks. Last-minute fixes that saved deals with nervous customers. He trained every green tech they brought in, including the guy who was now head of regional maintenance. Miles ducked into the side hallway near the service bays, away from the lot traffic. His disguise gave him invisibility, and he used it. Inside the break room, he found an old bulletin board, laminated flyers, a shift schedule, and a faded photo of the original Canyon Ridge crew. There, in the center, was Eddie, 20 years younger, holding up a socket set like a trophy, oil stains on his uniform, and a grin that could have lit the room. Miles stood frozen. How had this man gone from cornerstone to castaway? He spotted a young tech walking by, headphones around his neck. Miles stepped forward. "Hey, got a sec?" he asked, masking his voice with a slight drawl. The kid nodded. "You know a guy named Eddie Rivas?" The kid raised an eyebrow. "Yeah, he used to run this place. Everyone called him the Engine Whisperer. Could fix anything with a hum and a prayer. Heard he got laid off a couple years back. Corporate thing. You ever work with him?" "Briefly. Taught me how to adjust valve timing by sound alone. Guy's a legend." He lowered his voice. "Everyone says he got screwed. Didn't deserve what happened." Miles swallowed hard. He made his way next to the main office, and peeked through the glass. A regional manager, Bryce Halley, sat in a leather chair, tapping at a laptop, barking at someone over Bluetooth. Bryce had been recruited during the expansion phase. Data-focused, ruthless with payroll, always pushing leaner staffing and performance metrics. Miles clenched his jaw. Bryce had pitched him a dozen reports about efficiency and turnover, and he'd signed off every time. Trusted the numbers. Trusted the system. He hadn't thought to ask who was being lost in the shuffle. Back outside, Miles found a spot near the service bay, and sat on a bench. Eddie had probably built himself. He watched the mechanics, young, rushed, distracted, and realized something else. The soul of the place was gone, replaced by noise and sales quotas. Eddie hadn't just worked for him. He was Canyon Ridge. Miles stared out at the lot, the sun warming the trucks, but not his chest. He couldn't ignore it anymore. This wasn't just about a man who got laid off. This was about everything Miles said he stood for, and everything he'd failed to protect. And now, he had to face it. Face him. The diner across the street hadn't changed much in 20 years. Same cracked vinyl booths. Same jukebox in the corner, playing classic rock with too much static. The open sign flickered, like it wasn't sure it meant it. Eddie Rivas sat alone in a corner booth, nursing a black coffee, and staring out the window toward the dealership. He looked older than Miles remembered. Thinner, slower, like life had leaned hard on him the past few years. But his eyes still burned, with that same quiet intensity. Miles stood outside for a moment, hand hovering over the glass door, heart pounding like he was about to confront a ghost. He pulled open the door. The bell chimed overhead. Eddie didn't look up. Miles walked slowly to the booth, hat still low, beard masking his face. His mouth was dry. "Mind if I sit?" Eddie squinted at him. "You a reporter or something?" Miles shook his head and sat. "Number. Just someone who should have shown up a long time ago." Eddie stared at him for a long beat. Then something shifted in his eyes. Recognition. "Wait a minute?" His brow furrowed. That voice. Miles slowly lifted his cap. Eddie's face froze. "Miles?" His voice dropped not with awe, but with betrayal. "You're kidding me." Miles nodded once. Silent. Eddie leaned back, lips tight. He chuckled dryly, shaking his head. "You've got some nerve, showing up like this." "I know," Miles said quietly. "I didn't come here to defend what happened. I came to hear it from you. All of it. Eddie scoffed. You wanna hear it? Now? Miles didn't speak. Just waited. Eddie's jaw tightened. His voice cracked as he spoke. 18 years, Miles. 18. I was there when you were eating sandwiches. On the floor of a rented garage. I stayed when paychecks bounced. I worked through my wife's chemo treatments. My kids' asthma attacks. You remember those days? I remember, Miles said, throat tightening. I gave everything to that place. Trained those kids. Kept the lights on during the lean months. You told me we were family. Eddie's eyes welled, but didn't break. Then one day, Bryce Haley walks in with a clipboard and tells me I'm too expensive. No meeting, no warning. Just, pack up your tools. I never knew, Miles whispered. You never asked, Eddie snapped. Voice sharp now. You were too busy flying to Denver. Or shaking hands with investors. You let guys like Hallie treat the company like a spreadsheet instead of a shop, and I paid the price. Silence settled between them. The jukebox hummed in the background. A guitar solo faded into static. I thought you were better than that, Eddie said, softer now. I thought we built something real. Miles swallowed hard. I thought I did, too. Eddie wiped his eyes roughly, looked away, blinking at the sunlight pouring through the window. His shoulders sank. You broke something, man. Not just my job. My belief in it all. Miles leaned forward, voice low. Sincere. I came back because I can't fix what I don't face. And I'm facing it now. You deserve more than what happened to you, Eddie. A hell of a lot more. Eddie didn't answer. He just stared back at the dealership across the street. His silence said everything. The wound was still wide open. That night, Miles couldn't sleep. The motel room was clean enough. Bare walls. Scratchy sheets, humming air conditioner. But it might as well have been a prison cell. He sat at the edge of the bed, staring at a cracked lampshade, Eddie's words echoing like thunder in his head. You never asked. You broke something. I thought we built something real. Each line cut deeper than the last. For years, Miles had told himself he was doing it for them, for the employees, for the legacy, for the people who'd believed in him, when Canyon Ridge was just a pipe dream. Expansion was survival. Streamlining was smart. Delegating was leadership. But now, sitting in a silent room, with his own regrets pressing in like walls, he saw it clearly. He had traded loyalty for leverage, relationships for results, and Eddie Rivas had been the casualty of that blind ambition. Miles reached for his briefcase, the one he'd kept hidden in the trunk of the old Ranger, and pulled out a manila folder. Inside, quarterly reports, leadership notes, regional hiring charts, and a letterhead from Hallie Management Solutions. It was all so polished, so distant. Numbers, percentages, acronyms. One paper stood out, a 2019 memo signed by Bryce Hallie. Service lead, Rivas is no longer cost aligned with current strategic objectives. Cost aligned. That was how they defined 18 years of loyalty. Miles's eyes welled. Rage and shame surging together. How had he allowed this? He remembered Eddie's wife, Rosa, bringing in tamales during the holidays. He remembered Eddie working late, with a busted ankle during a snowstorm, just to finish a rebuild, for a single mom who needed her car, for night shifts. And he remembered promising Eddie, on more than one occasion, you'll always have a place here. Lies, not intentional ones, but lies all the same. Miles stood up and began to pace. Fingers knotted in his hair. He thought about the other names too, other loyal employees, who might have been let go in similar ways, while he smiled in boardrooms, and gave speeches about culture. Had he ever really seen what was happening beneath him, or had he chosen not to? He stopped at the mirror over the sink, staring into the tired eyes of a man who'd once been proud of his company. Now, he barely recognized himself. I let it rot, he whispered. I let good people be thrown out like old parts. R. He wanted to call Eddie. Say more. By forgiveness. But he knew now. It wasn't about words. Not anymore. Guilt wasn't meant to paralyze. It was meant to move you. He sank into the desk chair, flipped open a notebook, and began to write. Names. Policías. People he needed to speak with. Managers who needed to answer for their decisions. Things that needed to change. Not tomorrow. Now. The silence of the motel room was thick, but Miles felt something stir inside him. For the first time in years. Not shame. Not ego. Resolve. He'd built Cannon Ridge unsaid before. But now, he was going to rebuild it. From the wreckage. From the truth. Starting with Eddie. The next morning, the sun rose hard and fast, casting long shadows across the dealership lot. Miles was already there. Waiting. Not as the boss, but as a man trying to make something right. He spotted Eddie. Coming out of the diner again. Paper bag in one hand, coffee in the other. Sam avon boats. Sam quiet intensity. Miles crossed the street slowly, not bothering with the disguise this time. The flannel shirt was still on, but the hat was gone, and the beard had been trimmed. Enough to be recognized. Enough to be seen. Eddie. Eddie turned, his expression unreadable. The morning traffic hummed behind them, but for a moment, the world felt still. I want to talk, Miles said. Eddie sighed, clearly tired of talking. You already did? I wasn't done. Miles took a step closer, hands out, palms up. I've been up all night, going through what happened. I saw the memo, the numbers. I signed off on it without even looking at the name attached. That's on me. Eddie looked away, jaw clenched. You weren't just a name on a report, Miles continued. You built the bones of this place. I let that be erased. I let you be erased. Hi. Eddie shook his head slowly. Now you want a clean conscience, huh? Want me to say, it's all good, so you can sleep again? No, Miles said, his voice low. I don't want forgiveness right now. I want to offer something I should have given you years ago. A seat at the table. Eddie squinted. What the hell does that mean? I want you back. Not as a mechanic. Not to fix engines. But to help fix the company. I want you advising me directly. Reshaping how we train. How we promote. How we treat our people. I'm done with these suits, making decisions. From spreadsheets. Eddie blinked. Slowly. Then scoffed. You think I'd come back? After the way I was thrown out? You think I trust you? Miles felt the blow, but nodded. I don't expect trust. Not yet. But I'm asking for a chance to earn it. And I can't do that without you. Eddie looked down at the coffee in his hand. The silence between them filled with memories. Some good, most not. You know what it was like, Eddie said, voice cracking just slightly. After I got laid off, I couldn't find steady work for a year. No one wanted an outdated tech. My wife picked up cleaning jobs to keep us afloat. My daughter dropped out of school to work full-time. And every time I drove past this place, I saw my whole life parked out front. Like it didn't miss me at all. Miles's throat burned. I'm so sorry, Eddie. Yeah, Eddie said quietly. Me too. He turned to leave. Miles stepped forward again. You don't have to decide now. I'll wait. Eddie stopped, but didn't look back. I don't want to come back to that place. Then, softer. I don't know if I can. And with that, he crossed the street again, his figure shrinking in the morning light. Miles stood still, the ache of rejection heavy, but deserved. Some wounds didn't close overnight. But he wasn't giving up, because redemption wasn't a request. It was a road you walked alone, until someone believed enough to join you. The following week, Canyon Ridge Auto was flipped on its head. It started with a staff meeting, mandatory, in person, and led not by regional management, but by the man whose name hung over every billboard and license plate frame in northern Arizona. Miles Waverly. No disguise. No title card. Just a microphone, a weary face, and a truth that stunned the entire room. I let this place drift, he said, to a silent showroom packed with employees. I handed off responsibility to people who valued numbers over names. I told myself we were growing, when we were really rotting. Murmurs rippled. Phones stopped buzzing. People leaned in. Et continued. Voice steadier now. I found out one of our best was forced out. Eddie Rivas. Some of you worked with him. Some of you were trained by him. And I signed the paper that ended his time here, without even realizing it. He took a breath, then looked them all in the eyes. I'm here to tell you, that ends now. What followed wasn't just an apology. It was a blueprint for transformation. First, Bryce Halley was gone. Effective immediately. A public firing. Not out of spite, but as a clear message. The crowd gasped when Miles said it, but no one objected. A few even clapped. Second, every layoff decision from the past 5 years was being reevaluated. If there was a pattern of bias, retaliation, or profit-first decision, it would be overturned. Third, a legacy council was being formed, composed of longtime staff, current and former, who'd helped build Canyon Ridge from the ground up. They would have direct input on policy, hiring, and culture. No corporate barrier between them and the CEO. And finally, Miles made a personal vow. I'm moving my office out of headquarters. I'll be on site here at least 3 days a week. You'll see me, talk to me, challenge me. If something's wrong, I want to hear it. Not read it in a quarterly report. It wasn't rehearsed. It wasn't polished. But it was real. By the end of the meeting, something had shifted. Employees who'd walked in with skepticism walked out with something they hadn't felt in years: hope. But Miles didn't stop there. He showed up to the service bay in coveralls the next morning, asking questions, hauling parts, sitting with techs during lunch. He helped clean the breakroom walls. He shut down commission stacking that had been pressuring customers into unnecessary upgrades. He even stood in the rain one afternoon, helping an elderly customer jumpstart her truck. Not because cameras were rolling, but because it used to be who he was. Word spread fast. Customers noticed. So did Steph. But one person hadn't returned: Eddie. Every night, Miles walked past that same corner booth at the diner. Empty. Still. He kept showing up. Not for a headline. For penance. Because redemption isn't about making a speech. It's about proving, over and over, that you mean every damn word. It was a Thursday when he came back. Not with fanfare. Not with some grand entrance. Just a quiet figure, standing on the edge of the lot. Arms crossed, eyes scanning the rows of trucks, like he was searching for a ghost. Eddie Rivas. Miles spotted him through the service bay window. He was mid-conversation with a junior tech, when his voice faltered, his chest tightening, with something that felt dangerously close to hope. Eddie hadn't called, hadn't replied to the messages Miles left, or the letter he sent. Handwritten, no corporatiglos. But here he was, standing just past the tire racks, staring up at the Canyon Ridge auto sign, like he wasn't sure if he belonged. Miles wiped his hands, grease still clinging to his fingers, and walked toward the lot. Eddie turned, when he heard the boots crunching gravel. For a beat, they just stood there. No words, no shields, just two men, who had once built something together, and then watched it crumble. Miles was the first to speak. Didn't think I'd see you here again. Vexed. Eddie shrugged. Didn't think I'd want to be here again. Miles nodded slowly. You here for a visit, or something more? Eddie looked around. The shop, the showroom, the glass offices that now had their blinds pulled open. Inside, the new department heads were gathered around a table, with 3 techs in uniform, talking over policy drafts. Not a suit in sight. He spotted the new sign on the front wall. The Legacy Council, built by hands that built Canyon Ridge. Eeks note. Then his gaze settled back on Miles. I've been watching, Eddie said. Word travels. You let Bryce go. You rehired Dave from Phoenix. You brought back Sheila in HR after they pushed her out. You even called Marla's son about the apprentice program. Miles nodded. Didn't do it to impress you. I know, Eddie said, his tone unreadable. That's why I came. Silence stretched between them. Comfortable this time. Miles took a breath. That offer's still open. Advisor. Council member. Help me rebuild the right way. Eddie didn't answer immediately. His eyes wandered to the far corner of the lot, where the old bench still sat, faded and sun-bleached. I sat there the day I got fired, he said. Watched someone else walk into my bay, like it had never been mine, like I'd never mattered. You did, Miles said firmly. You still do. Eddie looked down at his boots, then up at the sky, then finally back at Miles. I'm not coming back to be anyone's puppet. You want real change, it's gonna hurt. I'm ready for that. Eddie studied him, searching for the old Miles, the one he used to believe in. He saw him, All right, Eddie said finally. I'll come back. On one condition. Name it. I want my own boots on that floor. I want to train these kids the way I was trained. No shortcuts. And I want every employee to know that this place is theirs, too. Not just yours. End of Tem. Miles grinned through the ache in his throat. Deal. They shook hands, calloused and honest. And just like that, the foundation shifted. The heart of Canyon Ridge had returned. Spring came early that year. The desert was alive with color, blooms pushing through the red dust, and for the first time in a long time, Canyon Ridge Auto felt alive too. It started small. Eddie Rivas's return was met with cautious curiosity. The younger techs didn't know him personally, but they knew the stories. The engine whisperer, the guy who could rebuild a transmission blindfolded, the one who got canned before most of them had ever punched a time card. But Eddie didn't return like a man seeking applause. He returned with his sleeves rolled, boots laced, and a quiet fire in his chest. He started a new training program, the Rivas Method, hands-on mentorship, that emphasized craftsmanship, not speed. Within weeks, bay efficiency went up, not down. Mistakes dropped. Pride returned. So did laughter. Miles watched it unfold, day by day. He didn't hide behind memos anymore. He sat in on trainings, shared meals with staff, relearned names, rebuilt bridges, one conversation at a time. The Legacy Council met every Friday. 2 senior techs, an HR rep, a bilingual receptionist from their New Mexico branch, and Eddie. Their job? Protect the soul of Canyon Ridge. Their voices weren't just heard, they shaped company policy. Customer experience changed too. Gone were the high-pressure tactics and commission traps. Salespeople were now trained to listen, not push, to build trust instead of urgency. One Saturday, an elderly couple came in looking for a used truck. The woman's husband had early-onset dementia and got overwhelmed easily. The old Canyon Ridge would have seen them as slow-footed and high-effort. Now, they were escorted inside, given lemonade, and matched with a patient team member Eddie had personally coached. They left with a pre-owned Ram, a fair price, and tears in their eyes. This place, the woman whispered to Miles as they shook hands, feels like it actually cares. Staff noticed the difference, too. Elise in accounting got reinstated after maternity leave, with flexible hours and a private room to nurse. Miguel, the parts runner, was promoted into a logistics coordinator role after Eddie spotlighted his potential. Turnover dropped. Morale rose. But it wasn't perfect. There were hard days, old habits, a few employees who pushed back, stuck in the profit-first mindset. But those moments were met with honesty, not defensiveness. Because now, when something broke, they talked about it. One afternoon, Eddie walked past the front lot and saw a young tech barely 20, struggling to diagnose a misfire. He didn't correct him with authority. He knelt beside him and asked, "Wanna hear a trick I learned in '98? By the end of the hour, 3 more techs had gathered around. A new kind of classroom, a new kind of culture. And Miles? He didn't stand above it. He stood in it, shoulder to shoulder, with Eddie. One afternoon, as the sun set behind the ridgeline, Eddie turned to Miles, while wiping grease from his hands. "This feels right," he said. "Like we're not just selling trucks anymore." Miles smiled. "We're not. We're building something that can't be parked on a lot." They didn't need applause. Just the sound of hammers, engines, and people, working together, rebuilding the soul of a company that nearly forgot its own heart. Canyon Ridge was back. But more importantly, so were they. The sun was just beginning to dip behind the Arizona horizon, painting the sky with streaks of gold and ember. The air was warm, with the scent of rubber, oil, and something new, hope. Eddie stood at the edge of the lot, arms folded, watching a young technician tighten the final bolts. "Una lifted F-150. The kid turned and gave a proud thumbs up. Eddie nodded back, a soft smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. Behind him, the glass showroom doors swung open. Miles stepped out, holding 2 root beers, in long neck bottles. "No meetings. No speeches," he said, handing one to Eddie. "Just thanks." Eddie took it without a word. They clinked the bottles together softly, like a toast not meant to be heard. Just fett. At that moment, a little girl ran past them barefoot, wild curls bouncing, chasing a plastic truck someone had left out. Her father, a customer picking up his vehicle, followed with a laugh, calling her name. She stopped between the two men, eyes wide. "You work here?" she asked, staring up at Eddie. Eddie chuckled. "Something like that." She pointed at the Canyon Ridge sign. "You help fix it?" Miles and Eddie exchanged a glance. Eddie bent down. "Yeah, sweetheart. I helped fix it." She grinned, gave a small wave, and ran back to her dad. Miles looked out across the rows of trucks and people. It was still a business. Still hard. But now, it was human again. He turned to Eddie and said, with quiet conviction, "The best engines don't just run. They carry people forward." Eddie nodded. "And the best people don't just work. They leave places better than they found them." Behind them, the shop lights flickered on, bright, warm, and ready. The road ahead was clear. And this time, they'd drive it, together.